Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our 30 on Thursday, where we will be talking about securing Office 365 with activity monitoring. If this is your first time joining us, our 30 on Thursday webinar series is a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar series where we talk all things Microsoft SharePoint and Enterprise Content Management. Our next webinar will be on October 22nd, where we will be talking about building Nintex mobile apps. You can see the full schedule of all of our webinars on our website, sharepoint.protiviti.com/webinars. You can register for all of them there. We are doing live tweeting today during the webinar. Please tweet us your questions and feedback at ProtivitiSP and use the hashtag 30TOff. Today's session, you can view this session and all of our past sessions at sharepoint.protiviti.com/archived webinars. During today's presentation, please insert any question in the question bar. We will get to all the questions at the end, or you can tweet us your questions again using the hashtag 30TOffice365. Today's topic, again, is securing Office 365 with activity monitoring. Our presenter today is Antonio Maio, our SharePoint MVP, and I am Julia Marple, and I am moderating today's session. So let's get started. Antonio, I'm going to make you presenter, and you can take it from there.
All right, thanks, Julia. Security information is a really broad topic, of course, and monitoring and auditing these systems, our information systems, and in particular the activities of users on those systems, is just one important aspect of securing our corporate IT environments. So let's start off talking about why monitoring activity and auditing our systems, reasons, of course, but one key driver requirements. So for example, many financial institutions often deal with what's called MNPI, or Material Non-Public Information. Generally, this is information that's not distributed to the public that an investor would probably consider important in making an investment decision. And many institutions need to put up compliance walls to ensure that specific aspects of the business do not communicate with each other. This helps to avoid conflicts of interest and helps to ensure that they don't inappropriately exchange MNPI. And detailed monitoring and auditing of user activity allows us to have a really detailed view into which users are accessing sensitive content, along with who they're sharing it with, and it helps us provide assurances that our regulatory, depending on our business and industry, around these particular business scenarios are being met. A second important consideration is data breaches. Now, we've heard a lot about data breaches in recent years. Data breaches can be small or they can be large. They can be malicious or they can be accidental. Data breaches can also be caused by external actors like cyber criminals or by insiders like system administrators or employees that have broad levels of access. Generally, we tend to see data breaches caused more often by external actors, but we see data breaches by insiders to involve either larger quantities of data or more significant data. And when data breaches do occur, it's important for organizations to investigate and find the root cause so that they can both measure the scale of the breach, so for example how much data was leaked, but also to put in place measures that prevent these data breaches in the future. And when data breaches do occur as a result of an insider threat, for example, monitoring user activity at a really detailed level allows us to perform investigations and root cause analysis to determine exactly who accessed data, when it was accessed, which actions were taken on that data, like who it was shared with. And then thirdly, when it comes to considering why we monitor our systems, why we need this level of monitoring, In many organizations, it's important to audit the current access controls that are in place for sensitive content. This is sometimes referred to as recertifying permissions, or getting data owners to review and sign off that permissions are accurately set for data that they're responsible for. In large organizations with large, diverse information systems, it can be really difficult to identify who's responsible for different data repositories. And monitoring user activity at a detailed level, getting that level of detail, allows us to gain insight into who's accessing data on a regular basis, along with the level of access they have. And this can really help us to identify data owners that can ultimately review and recertify those permissions on sensitive content. Now, earlier this year, in July, Microsoft announced some new capabilities around this within Office 365. Specifically, these are new activity monitoring and reporting features. These capabilities are designed to help organizations that are continually facing challenges with security, privacy, and compliance. In running and supporting the Office 365 service themselves, Microsoft has found that they're capturing large amounts of data on activities that end users and administrators are performing day to day. They typically refer to this data as telemetry. And they built some great mechanisms into Office 365 to allow them to efficiently capture that data and now to share that data with us. These new capabilities provide a lot more visibility for administrators and ultimately for people like compliance and risk officers into the actions taken by users on corporate content. They also allow us to apply greater access control over our data, and if needed, they give us capabilities to now investigate at a very detailed level user actions that might be against corporate or regulatory policies. So let's look at these features now. The first of these features, just back up for a second, the first of these features is a new Office 365 activity report, which is actually built into the Office 365 user experience, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. The second feature is much more comprehensive event logging. Third, they've added a new PowerShell commandlet for searching event logs. And then finally, they've added a management activity API, which is in limited preview right now, that lets you integrate event logs with your internal or third-party monitoring and reporting solutions. So let's take a look at the Office 365 activity report. It can be accessed by logging into your Office 365 tenant, navigating to the admin application in the App Launcher, and then clicking Compliance Center, then Reports, then Office 365 Activity Report. So it's pretty easy to get to. You can use the Office 365 report to view really detailed user and administrator activity in your tenant. It contains data across SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Exchange Online, and Azure Active Directory, or Azure AD. You can use this report to search and investigate user activities, as we've talked about, by searching for a user, for a file or folder, or even for a site. Then you can filter the data based on date range or the type of activity. And within the report window that you can see here, you can either view details of each activity in the Details pane, or you can scan through the events that are logged and that have been found as a result of your search. When you find what you've been looking for, you can either review those activities and details right here in this window, or you can download the list of activities to a CSV file. And they provide a link for that right within the page here. Now, within each event, within each activity, or within each event, there's 37 different properties that are logged. And not all the properties apply to all Office 365 services. Some only apply to SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, whereas others only apply to Exchange Online, for example. The list of properties captured are shown here, with some of my favorites highlighted in red. So I just want to talk about those quickly for a second. The first activity here, the first event that I've highlighted here is the actor. This is actually the user that's performed the action that you're looking at. It can also be a service principal as well. The second property is the client IP, and this is actually the IP address of the device that was used when the activity was logged. This can actually be an IPv4 address or an IPv6 address. Third, I very much like the event source. This identifies if an event occurred in SharePoint, in OneDrive for Business, or even with the object model. Then we also have the login type, and this one relates specifically to Exchange. This is the type of user that accessed an Exchange mailbox, and this can be either the mailbox owner, the administrator, someone you've delegated access to your mailbox to. It can be the Exchange transport service. It can be a service account or a delegated administrator. So with this one in particular, I love the fact that you can distinguish between a mailbox owner accessing their own mailbox or a delegate accessing their mailbox. The next one that I highlight here is the subject. So this also relates to Exchange and emails in particular. And this is actually the subject line of an email message that was accessed. So you can see that right here in your reports. Then we have user shared with. And this is the user that a resource like a file or document was shared with. And then finally, there's the user type that I really like. The user type is, of course, the type of user that performed the particular operation. And this can be either a regular user, it can be an administrator of your Office 365 tenant, or it can be a Microsoft Data Center administrator. So again, here I love the fact that you can distinguish between an administrator of your Office 365 tenant or the Microsoft Data Center administrator. Now, if we look at event logging, in order to make the activity report that we've seen really useful, events related to user or administrator activities are logged as users work across SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Exchange Online, and Active Directory. And Microsoft has greatly enhanced with this release the number of events that are logged. Right now there's over 150 events that get logged, and they're divided through 9 categories that I show here. Those categories can be either Exchange admin events, they can be Exchange mailbox events, they can be file and folder events, which applies to SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business only. They can be invitation and access request events, again for SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business only. There's sharing events, there's site administration events, synchronization events, and then finally Azure Active Directory events. Now let's take a look at a couple of these categories of events just to give you an idea of the breadth of events that are logged and reported. First, I'd like to look at the file and folder events, and those are listed here. And just scanning through here quickly, we can see when a file was checked in, we can see when a file is checked out, we can see when a checkout is discarded, we can see when files are copied or deleted, and we can even see when files are downloaded. So you can actually view across your SharePoint and OneDrive for Business environment every time a file gets downloaded, what that file is, and who it was downloaded by. We can see when files are modified, when they're moved, renamed, even when files are uploaded. So when a new file gets uploaded, or every time a new file gets uploaded to your SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business site, that gets logged. And finally, you can also see every time a file is viewed within SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business. This even includes when system accounts access and view files. So very detailed monitoring around file and folder events specifically here. If we look at a second category, the sharing events, we can see the first event is external sharing set. Now, if you use the external sharing features of Office 365, you can share files from SharePoint and OneDrive for Business with users that are external to your organization. And every time that happens, an event gets logged, and you can access that through that event there. External sharing of content can be done through links in Office 365. And what also gets logged is every time a link gets created or every time a link gets disabled. You can also revoke sharing. That's an important function to do at times. That also gets logged here. And then finally, the sharing set event logs every time that a file or folder is shared with an internal user within your organization. So here you can get very detailed telemetry every time a file or a folder is shared with either anyone external to your organization or internal to your organization. Now, the events that get logged are extremely diverse. They're very comprehensive, as we can see here, and Microsoft's continually working to log more and more events. When it comes to investigating data leaks, these types of events and the level of detail give administrators really detailed investigation capabilities, determine exactly how leaks occurred and how to prevent them in the future. Looking at the third feature, that was provided as part of this release, you can now search for events in the activity logs that we've been looking at using PowerShell. So there's a new PowerShell commandlet that's available that allows you to search all the event logs based on either date range, the user who performed an action, the type of action, or the target object. So some examples of using this commandlet I'm showing here. Right? So in the first example, we can call our PowerShell commandlet with a start date and end date, and this gives us a date range to search. So with that first example, it'll return back all the events that were logged between September 1st, 2015 and September 30th, 2015. Now you can imagine that in an Office 365 environment of any meaningful size, that's going to be a lot of events. So we can target that much more accurately, as we can see in the second example. In the second example, again, we're searching between September 1st and September 30th, but then we're looking specifically for the file viewed operation. So we specify the category of the event, SharePoint file operation. We specify the specific operation that we're looking for, file viewed, and then we can specify some data about the type of event that we're looking for. And in this case, we're looking just at docx files. So this will return all files that were viewed, all Word documents that were viewed between September 1st and September 30th in our environment. And we can get more specific as well with other parameters in the PowerShell script that's available, in the PowerShell commandlet that's available. Through this capability, we can script our searches of the event logs, of all the event logs that we've seen here. We can also have these searches output the results to a file, and ultimately this can allow us to schedule our reports to occur automatically on a regular basis, so that administrators or InfoSec people can get insight into specific activities either every morning, every week, or whatever the business schedule might demand. And then finally, as part of this release, Microsoft has made available a new Management Activity API. This allows developers to integrate Office 365 activity and event data, so all the event data that we've been looking at, with either internal tools or with third-party monitoring and reporting solutions. Now, there's a specific process that you need to go through in order to integrate your solution with the Office 365 event data. First, you're going to register your application with Azure AD, and this is going to give it an identity, and it's going to allow you to specify the specific permissions it needs to access the APIs. Then within your Office 365 tenant, you need to explicitly grant consent for your application to access event data within the tenant through. And then once those processes are going to code of your application, going to use the credentials that you just established to request an access token. Now this is a special token called an app-only token, and you can only request it from a tenant that has already granted to the application to access the tenant data. And then you're going to use that access token for repeated requests going forward. Once that process has been set up, then you're going to start calling the Management API. Now the Management API is a subscription model. It's going to allow you content. And then once you've subscribed to content types, you're going to receive notifications through a web hook that you integrate with when content is available depending on the content types that you're looking for. And then through the Management API, you're going to retrieve that content, and that's going to come back to you as a JSON object. And then you can integrate into your application or into your monitoring and reporting solution as needed. Now there's a couple of important points about the API. First of all, right now the API is in limited preview, and during the preview anyone can use the API, and there's extensive documentation available for it online, but only those that have registered with Microsoft for the limited preview are actually going to be able to retrieve data from Office 365. And then the second important point is that actions and events related to event logging here are stored in content blobs within the database in Office 365. And they're gathered across multiple servers and data centers. And as a result of this kind of distributed collection process, the actions and events contained in the content blobs are not necessarily going to appear in the order in which they've occurred. So for example, one content blob could contain actions or events that occurred before the actions and events of an earlier content blob. And you'll need to parse that data and displayed or integrated appropriately if the order in which those events occurred is important to how you're processing the data once you've retrieved it. So just a couple of important points to note there about the API. And then just summarizing things, as we mentioned earlier, activity monitoring and reporting is just one aspect of securing information systems. It's an important aspect, and Microsoft has made some new key features available in Office 365 to enhance that process and allow you to do that. Some key drivers why monitoring activity within our systems is important are to enhance our ability to comply with the regulatory standards that are important to our business or industry. It allows us to enhance our access control and provide more visibility into user activity that's related to our content. And in the case of data breaches, it allows for very detailed investigation into exactly what occurred, helping us to prevent data breaches in the future. The new activity monitor features within Office 365 give us much deeper visibility into user activity, as we can see from the events and reports that are available. It also allows us to integrate this data with our internal monitoring systems or with our third-party solutions that we're using. And it crosses several of the key services available through Office 365, so SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Exchange Online, and Azure AD. And it's accessed through the Office 365 Compliance Center. We've seen the user experience that's available now, which is really easy to get to and quite easy to use. And some of these reports you're going to find as you navigate through the Office 365 Admin Console. Some of these reports are also available within Exchange audit reports or through Azure Active Directory audit reports as well. And then finally, I'll be posting these slides to my blog here, www.trustsharepoint.com, and the recording of the webinar will be available.
Antonio. So the question window, we do have a here. Okay, first, activity monitoring and report features in my Office 365 tenant.
So the activity monitoring features, Microsoft is in the process of rolling these features out now. So you might not yet see them in your Office 365 tenant. They're in the process of rolling them out, and that process can take a certain period of time. Microsoft deploys features out in rings, starting with different different priorities for different tenants. But it should be sometime soon. The rollout process is underway now.
Okay, great. And what type of activities can I monitor in Azure Active Directory?
So Azure Active Directory or Azure AD actually provides a lot of events that you can monitor. What you're going to find is that the first time you try to access the reports related to Azure AD, you're going to need to complete a one-time registration process to get access to those reports in the Azure AD Management Portal. It's an easy process to go through. It's a free subscription that you're applying to. It's important to note that it's not available if you're doing a trial of Office 365. It's also not available for an educational license. It's only available for paid licenses. Related to the events that you can monitor, like I mentioned, there's a lot of events that you can monitor through the Azure AD reports, and there's actually a couple of reports available. From an end user perspective, you can monitor sign-in activity. So whenever a user signs into Office 365, and you can also monitor suspicious sign-in activity. For example, if there's multiple failed attempts on logging into a particular account, and then you can take action based on that. From an administrator's perspective, there's I think it's over 35 events that can be included in your reports. Things like adding, editing, or deleting users, adding, editing, or deleting groups, of course, changing password policies, adding a domain, resetting passwords. The reports from an administrator perspective in Azure AD get extremely detailed, and those can be really useful when you need to not only monitor end users, but also monitor your administrators.
Great, thank you. We have another question. How did you get to the activity monitoring? What is the name of the link in the left navigation?
So in the left navigation, you're going to go to Compliance Center. And then from there on the screen, you would click Reports. And then within the window on the right, you're going to click Office 365 Activity Report. And again, it may not yet be available in some Office 365 tenants. I myself have tried to get timing from Microsoft when the rollout is going to be complete, but have not heard on that yet. They're not sharing that information on when the rollout will be complete to all tenants.
Okay, great. One more question. What DLP solutions work well for scanning Azure environments without installing agents?
A little bit of a different topic from the presentation, but DLP environments for Julie, could you repeat the question again?
Yep. What DLP solutions work well for scanning Azure environments without installing agents?
So there's a number of DLP solutions out there for scanning Azure environments. Without installing agents is a great question. This is a little different than Office 365. So Office 365 has DLP capabilities that have been recently built into it and recently launched. And those are very robust, and they monitor your Office 365 events, and they provide alerts, and you can configure policies in a very detailed way. If you're specifically talking about Azure, you're managing VMs yourself, there's a number of DLP solutions out there. In terms of not installing agents, it's a great question. Something I probably need to get back to people on. Many of the security providers out there have great tools for monitoring on-premise systems and Azure VMs. If you're specifically talking Azure, you've deployed your own servers to the Azure environment. You're managing them yourself. Some of the good providers out there, Trend Micro is a good provider of a DLP solution that'll monitor Office 365. Sorry, not Office 365, but Azure. Some of the other large players out there as well have solutions like Symantec and McAfee as well. Whether they install an agent or not in the Azure VM, that I would have to check into and get back to the person on.
Okay, great. And that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you everyone for attending today's session. We will see you back on October 22nd where we will be talking about Nintex mobile apps. Thank you again, Antonio, for the presentation.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks everyone for attending.
Have a great day, everyone.